Hello. They say the biggest betrayals don't come with warning signs. No dramatic music, no ominous clouds rolling in. Just a regular morning, a hot cup of coffee, and an email that wasn't supposed to land in my inbox. One click. That's all it took for everything I believed in to shatter. But the problem with trying to betray a man like me is simple. I don't break. I calculate. I adapt. And I strike back harder than anyone ever expects. I woke up at my usual time, 6 a.m. sharp. My morning routine was predictable, just like my life, or so I thought. Coffee brewed as I stepped onto the balcony, taking in the view of the city skyline. Below me, the world was already in motion, cars honking, people hurrying to jobs they hated. I took a slow sip, feeling the warmth of the mug in my hands. It was a good life. A structured, disciplined, successful life. Inside, I heard the faint hum of the espresso machine. Megan was awake too. She appeared in the doorway, stretching lazily, her silk robe draped over her shoulders. "Morning," she murmured, flashing me a quick smile before heading to the fridge. I smiled back, unaware that the woman standing in my kitchen was plotting to steal everything I had built. The emails started coming in the moment I opened my laptop. Routine stuff, investor updates, project reports, meeting reminders. I barely paid attention, skimming through them on autopilot. And then, one subject line caught my eye. Final share distribution before voting. Confidential. Sent by Ryan, our CTO. Something about it made me pause. It was just another corporate document, right? But my name was on the recipient list, which was unusual. My curiosity got the better of me, so I clicked. A spreadsheet loaded on my screen. Numbers, names, ownership percentages. At first glance, it all seemed normal. Then, I looked for my name. I scrolled and scrolled. Finally, I found it. At the very bottom, my shares had been drastically reduced. Megan's, on the other hand, had increased significantly. And Ryan? His holdings had just skyrocketed. The pieces fell into place almost instantly. This wasn't a mistake. It was a coup. I exhaled slowly, reading the document again, but the numbers didn't change. Megan, my wife, my business partner, the woman I had trusted with everything, was orchestrating my removal from the very company I built from nothing. And Ryan, the man I had personally hired and mentored, was her accomplice. Together, they had maneuvered behind my back, securing enough control to force me out when the time was right. Most men would have exploded, yelled, called her immediately, demanding answers. But I don't play that way. Emotional reactions are for weak men. I don't get angry. I get even. I leaned back in my chair, folding my fingers together, my heartbeat calm, steady. I could almost picture their smug expressions as they discussed their plan. How they must have thought I was too distracted, too trusting to see it coming. Oh, Megan. She always considered herself the smartest person in the room. Cold, ambitious, calculated. That's what I had admired about her. But she had made one critical mistake. She forgot that I don't lose. I let out a slow breath, feeling an unexpected sense of amusement creeping in. Not because any of this was funny, but because Megan had no idea what was about to happen to her. I shut my laptop and stood up. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened screen. A man who had just learned that the one person he trusted most was planning to betray him. But there was no panic in his eyes. No fear. Only cold, calculating certainty. This morning, Megan thought she had one. But by the time I was finished, she would wish she had never even tried. Success, structure, stability, 3 things I had spent my entire adult life perfecting. And for the longest time, I believed I had it all. A thriving business, a beautiful and intelligent wife, a well-balanced routine that kept me sharp and in control. My life was a finely tuned machine, predictable yet fulfilling. Every morning was the same, yet I never once found it dull. I would wake up before the sun, stretch out the tension from the previous day, and enjoy the silence of the early hours. The city was never truly quiet, but there was something about those moments before the real chaos began that felt peaceful. I liked peace. I built my entire world around maintaining it. By the time Megan woke up, I had already showered and was halfway through my first cup of coffee. She always emerged from the bedroom in that effortless way she did everything, her silk robe draped over her shoulders, her hair slightly tousled but still perfect. "Morning," she'd murmur, stepping past me to pour herself a cup of coffee. A simple, familiar exchange, one that had happened every morning for years. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have a woman like her, to have a routine that felt easy, to have built something together, not just a marriage, but a company, a legacy. Megan wasn't just my wife. She was my partner in business and in life. When we started EtherTech, we were just two ambitious minds, working out of a cramped apartment, fueled by caffeine and the insane idea that we could change the world. And somehow, we did. The late nights, the sacrifices, the endless setbacks, it all paid off. EtherTech grew beyond our wildest dreams, and so did we. We moved into a sleek penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city we had conquered. We hosted elegant dinner parties, networked with billionaires, and played the game better than anyone. We were unstoppable. At least, that's what I thought. Looking back, I can see the cracks that were there all along. Little things that seemed insignificant at the time but now stand out like flashing neon signs. The way Megan's phone was always face down on the table. The extra hours she started putting in at the office. At first, we both worked insane schedules, but at some point, I started making time for us while she only seemed to make time for work. And then there were the subtle shifts in her affection. Nothing drastic, nothing overt. Just small things. The way she used to lean into me when we walked side by side, how she used to text me updates throughout the day, even when she was busy. Over time, those habits faded, and I chalked it up to stress, to success demanding more of our time. It never occurred to me that she was investing her time elsewhere. Still, for the most part, life felt good. We had money, influence, and power. And on paper, our marriage was perfect. We were the kind of couple that people envied, smart, successful, and completely in sync. At least, that's what I let myself believe. If there were signs, I ignored them. Not because I was blind, but because I had no reason to doubt her. Trust wasn't something I ever questioned with Megan. She was calculated, strategic, the kind of woman who always had a plan. But I never thought her plans would exclude me. Our evenings were just as structured as our mornings. We rarely had dinner at home unless we were entertaining guests. Most nights were spent at high-end restaurants, wining and dining potential investors, keeping up appearances. Megan thrived in those environments. She was charismatic, sharp, always knowing exactly what to say. Watching her work a room was like watching an artist at their craft. And I was proud of her. Proud of us. The power couple that built an empire from the ground up. But there were moments, small and fleeting, where something felt off. A hesitation in her responses. A vague answer when I asked about her day. The way she seemed just a little too engaged in certain conversations at dinners. The subtle shifts in her body language when certain names came up. At the time, I told myself I was overthinking. Megan had always been ambitious, always looking for the next big move. That's what made her such a force in business. It never crossed my mind that her next move might involve cutting me out. The night before I found that email, everything was business as usual. We had dinner at one of our usual spots, a sleek, dimly lit restaurant where the waitstaff knew our names and drink orders before we even sat down. She was in a good mood, laughing more than usual, her phone tucked away in her clutch instead of on the table. I remember thinking how beautiful she looked that night, how, despite the chaos of our work, we still had these moments together. And then I remember the way she excused herself mid-meal to take a phone call. Just a quick work thing, she had said, flashing me an apologetic smile. I didn't think twice about it. She came back a few minutes later, seemingly unbothered, but now, knowing what I know, I wonder what was said on that call. Was it Ryan? Were they discussing their final steps? Was she confirming that I was still clueless? That I still trusted her? That she had me exactly where she wanted? It's strange, the things we overlook when we don't want to see them. If I had known then what I know now, I would have paid more attention. I would have studied her more closely, questioned the small things instead of dismissing them. But that's the beauty of hindsight, it always arrives too late. Except this time, it wasn't too late. Because I did see the truth. And now, Megan was going to see what happens when you betray the one man who never loses. It started as a whisper in the back of my mind, so faint, so easy to ignore. A feeling, a shift in the air. Nothing tangible, nothing I could point to and say, there. That's the moment everything changed. But something had changed. The problem with being a logical man is that you don't entertain paranoia. You don't chase ghosts or fabricate problems where none exist. But you also don't ignore patterns. And Megan was changing in ways that didn't make sense. It was little things at first. The way she started glancing at her phone more often, the way her smiles felt practiced, controlled. Megan was always a composed woman, sharp, unreadable when she wanted to be. But there was something new in her demeanor now, an underlying tension that hadn't been there before. It wasn't obvious, not to the casual observer. But I wasn't casual. I knew her better than anyone. Or at least, I thought I did. The first real moment that stood out to me happened on a Tuesday night. We had just wrapped up a late meeting with a potential investor, and instead of heading home together like we usually did, Megan insisted on taking her own car. "I have to make a quick stop before heading back," she said, brushing off my raised eyebrow. "A stop where?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Just something for the office." It was a simple response, but something about it bothered me. Megan didn't handle last-minute errands. She delegated. She was efficient, methodical. If something needed to be done for the office, it would have been scheduled, planned, executed without any unnecessary detours. But I didn't press. I just nodded. "All right. See you at home." And I did. She came home late, slipping into bed as if nothing had happened. But the way she kissed me goodnight felt off, distant, mechanical. Like a performance. A few days later, I walked into the kitchen one morning to find her standing by the window, phone pressed to her ear, whispering. I caught only fragments of the conversation, low, measured words spoken with precision. She was good at keeping secrets, but I was better at noticing them. "No, he has no idea." A short pause. "I told you, it's handled." She must have sensed me enter, because she turned quickly, ending the call with a smooth, "All right, we'll talk later." She smiled at me, slipping her phone into the pocket of her silk robe as if nothing had happened. "Who was that?" I asked casually, pouring my coffee. "Just work," she said easily, without hesitation. A perfect, effortless lie. I didn't push. I didn't need to. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. Not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. Megan was never defensive, never careless. And she never had to assure anyone that I was clueless. Later that evening, I tested her. Over dinner, I brought up a deal I was considering, something we had briefly discussed weeks ago. I watched her carefully as I spoke, measuring her reactions. "I was thinking about pulling the trigger on that acquisition," I said, swirling the wine in my glass. "What do you think?" She hesitated. Just for a second. Barely noticeable. But I caught it. "I trust your instincts," she said smoothly, taking a sip of her drink. "You always make the right call." Another lie. Megan never gave vague answers when it came to business. She would have grilled me on the details, weighed the pros and cons, played devil's advocate. But not this time. This time, she just wanted to move past the conversation. I let it go. But inside, the whisper in my mind was growing louder. A week later, the cracks widened. I came home earlier than expected one night, stepping into our penthouse just as Megan was shutting her laptop. Too quickly. She barely looked up. "You're home early," she said, closing the screen with deliberate calm. "Yeah," I said, setting my keys down. "Meeting got rescheduled." She nodded, but I could see the wheels turning in her mind, calculating. I walked over and leaned against the counter. "What were you working on?" Megan was a master of composure. Her expression never faltered. "Just some final reports for the board." Another easy lie. I took my time pouring a drink, watching her from the corner of my eye. "Mind if I take a look?" It was a test. And she knew it. Megan smiled, that same charming, effortless smile she had perfected over the years. "You don't need to check my work, do you?" She laughed lightly, but there was an edge to it. A subtle warning. I took a sip of my drink, holding her gaze. "Of course not." She relaxed, just a little. And that told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't just my imagination. Something was happening. I didn't have proof, not yet. But I had instinct. And instinct had never failed me before. So I played along. I let Megan believe that I was exactly what she wanted me to be: distracted, busy, trusting. I kissed her goodnight, whispered "I love you" against her skin, and pretended I didn't feel the way her body tensed ever so slightly under my touch. I pretended I didn't notice the new distance between us. I pretended I wasn't already preparing for whatever game she was playing. Because whatever it was, I intended to win. That was no longer an option. Instinct had already told me everything I needed to know. Megan was hiding something. And if there's one thing I've learned in both business and life, it's that when people start keeping secrets, they inevitably leave trails. Small, almost imperceptible clues that, when pieced together, reveal everything. The trick isn't to catch them in a lie. The trick is to let them think they're getting away with it while you quietly dismantle their illusion. I started with the simplest test, her phone. Megan was always careful, always strategic. She never left her screen unlocked, and lately, she had become even more guarded. Before, she had no problem checking her messages in front of me, casually scrolling while we talked. But now, she barely touched it when I was in the room. And when she did, her body language betrayed her, angling the screen away from my view. locking it instantly the moment I walked by. It was subtle, but it was there. One evening, while she was in the shower, I reached for her phone where it sat charging on the nightstand. I didn't expect it to be unlocked, but I wanted to test something. I pressed the screen. Password protected, of course. That wasn't new. But the numbers, something was different. I had seen her enter her passcode 1,000 times over the years, my mind naturally memorizing the pattern. But now, when I tried the familiar sequence, it didn't work. She had changed it. Not a major detail on its own. People update their passwords all the time. But Megan? She wasn't just people. She was calculated. She never changed anything unless there was a reason. And the only reason she would change her passcode was if she didn't want me to see something. I put the phone back exactly as it was, making sure not to leave a trace. I didn't need to force my way in, not yet. There were other ways to get what I needed. The next step was watching her patterns. I paid attention to everything. The way she left the office later than usual but always had a perfectly rehearsed reason why. The way she started forgetting details about her day when I asked about meetings or who she had lunch with. She was still smooth, still effortless with her lies, but she underestimated one thing. I wasn't just listening to what she said. I was analyzing what she didn't say. Then came the real test. One evening, I casually mentioned that I was thinking about heading out of town for a few days for a business trip. It was a lie. There was no trip. But I wanted to see her reaction. Megan had always been indifferent about my travel. She was just as busy as I was, and we both knew our careers required time apart. But this time, there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Not disappointment. Not concern. Relief. It was gone in an instant, masked by her usual nonchalance, but I caught it. And that's when I knew for certain. She wanted me gone. That same night, I made sure to leave my laptop open on the kitchen counter, a carefully crafted email displayed on the screen, a fake itinerary, complete with flight details and hotel reservations. I positioned it just right, knowing Megan would pass by and see it. And she did. She barely glanced at it, but I saw her reaction. The tension in her shoulders eased. She thought she had space. I went through my usual nighttime routine, kissed her goodnight, and waited. At exactly 12:17 a.m., she slipped out of bed, moving as quietly as possible. I kept my breathing steady, pretending to be asleep as she took her phone and padded into the living room. I gave her 10 minutes before I followed. She was sitting on the couch, phone pressed to her ear, whispering, "Yeah, he's leaving tomorrow. No, he doesn't suspect anything." A pause. "I told you, it's fine. I'll handle it." She was lying. Not just to me. To whoever was on the other end of that call. I stepped back before she could see me, returning to bed as if I had never left. She came back a few minutes later, slipping under the covers like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just confirmed every suspicion I had. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I carried on as usual, playing my part. I kissed her before heading to catch my flight, even sending her a fake boarding pass screenshot once I was at the airport. She bought it without question. And then I watched. Using security access from our office, I tracked her movements. Every entry and exit logged. Every call she made on her company-issued phone. Megan thought she had everything under control. She thought she had covered her tracks. But she had forgotten one crucial detail. You don't outplay the man who taught you the game. And now? Now I had everything I needed to bury her. I always believed that betrayal had a sound. That there would be a moment, a crack in a voice, a hesitation in a lie, that would signal the truth breaking through. But when I finally uncovered Megan's secret, it was silent. Cold. Undeniable. Not a whispered confession, not an emotional breakdown. Just raw, irrefutable evidence. And the moment I saw it, something inside me shifted. There was no shock, no desperate attempt to deny what was right in front of me. Only a dark, settling clarity. She thought she had one. That morning, I had no meetings, no distractions. Just time. And I used it wisely. I had already begun tracking Megan's patterns, logging her phone activity through our company's systems, monitoring security footage from our office, things she had no idea I still had access to. She thought she had locked me out. But I built this empire. There wasn't a single door she could close that I couldn't reopen. And when I did, the truth came spilling out in ways she never anticipated. It started with a single email. A confirmation from a hotel downtown, one I had never been to, but one that had a room reserved in her name. The check-in date? The night she told me she was working late. The recipient of the reservation details? Ryan. That was enough to set my pulse at a steady, ice-cold rhythm. But I wasn't here to jump to conclusions. I wanted proof. Proof so airtight that even Megan wouldn't be able to talk her way out of it. So I dug deeper. Company phone records showed multiple late-night calls between her and Ryan, always after midnight, always lasting just long enough to say what needed to be said. Bank statements? A charge for a high-end restaurant, the same night I had been out of town on a supposed business trip. A trip I staged just to see if she would take the bait. She did, and it led her straight into my trap. But the real confirmation? Security footage. EtherTech had high-level security, cameras in nearly every corner of the building, all linked to a system only a handful of executives had access to. Megan had assumed that, after our last system update, I was locked out. She had underestimated just how much control I still had. And when I accessed the footage from our office's private lounge, reserved only for senior executives, I saw everything I needed to see. Megan, sitting too close to Ryan on the sleek leather couch, a glass of wine in her hand, her legs crossed in that way she did when she was entirely comfortable. Ryan, leaning in, his hand brushing her thigh as he whispered something against her ear. She laughed. Relaxed. They weren't discussing work. There was no tension, no professionalism. Just two people enjoying each other's company in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. And then, the final nail in the coffin, she kissed him. Not a fleeting, uncertain thing. Not a mistake. A deep, deliberate kiss. One that told me everything I needed to know about how far this had gone. I stared at the screen, my expression unreadable, my heart rate steady. No anger. No grief. Just realization. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the betrayal on every level. She had planned this. She had aligned herself with Ryan, conspired to take my company, to cut me out of the empire I had built. The affair wasn't the core of the betrayal, it was just the symptom. The real disease was her ambition. I closed the footage, exhaling slowly. This wasn't the part where I let my emotions consume me. This wasn't where I lost control. No. This was the part where I took everything Megan had built inside her little fantasy world and burned it to the ground. She thought she had won. She thought she had beaten me. But she forgot one crucial rule: I never lose. And now, it was time to show her exactly what that meant. Revenge, when executed correctly, is never loud. It's not an outburst, not a reckless act of rage. It's a slow, deliberate process, a series of moves so precise that by the time your opponent realizes they've lost, the game has already been over for weeks. Megan and Ryan thought they were architects of deception, but they were nothing more than amateurs playing a game they never truly understood. Their plan to push me out of EtherTech, to erase me from my own empire, was clever, yes, but it wasn't flawless. No, they made one critical mistake. They underestimated me. I didn't need to destroy Megan. That would be too simple, too predictable. Instead, I would dismantle the very foundation she stood on. Strip her of the power she thought she held. Make her watch as the empire she betrayed me for slipped through her fingers. I wasn't going to take her down in one dramatic move. I was going to make her watch as everything she had built collapsed, piece by piece, and there would be nothing she could do to stop it. First, I needed control. Megan believed she had locked me out of the company's most critical decisions. What she didn't realize was that, long before she and Ryan even thought about betraying me, I had already planned for contingencies. I had contacts she didn't know about, quiet agreements with key investors, and most importantly, I still had leverage. With one call, I set things in motion. A confidential meeting with my most trusted allies within the company, men and women who had been with me since the beginning. They were appalled when I showed them the evidence. Not just of the affair, but of how Megan and Ryan were maneuvering behind closed doors, convincing shareholders that I had lost my edge, that I was no longer fit to lead. It wasn't difficult to turn the tide against them. They thought they had secured enough votes to push me out. They were wrong. While Megan continued to believe she was in control, I worked quietly to ensure she was already standing on sinking ground. I arranged for an internal audit. Officially, it was routine, nothing unusual. Unofficially, it was targeted. Every questionable transaction, every late-night expense under company funds, every trace of unethical behavior was being compiled. Megan had been careful, but no one is careful enough when they believe they're untouchable. Then, I moved to phase 2. Ryan had been the real weak link in all of this. He wasn't as intelligent as he thought he was. He was an opportunist, feeding off Megan's ambition, riding her coattails while believing he was the one in control. It didn't take much to push him into making a mistake. A whispered rumor here, a well-placed piece of misinformation there. He started doubting Megan, questioning her loyalty, Because if she was willing to betray her husband, how long before she betrayed him? That's the thing about people like Ryan. They don't trust anyone, not truly. And when you plant the right seeds of doubt, they grow into paranoia. While Ryan was busy watching his back, Megan remained blissfully unaware. She was still playing the part of the untouchable queen, believing she had already won. That's what made this so satisfying. Watching her move through her days, completely oblivious to the noose tightening around her neck. She had no idea that the same investors she had courted were now turning against her, that the financial foundation she thought was stable was already starting to crack. She had no idea that her allies were vanishing, that soon, when she reached out for help, no one would be there to catch her. And then, the final move. The public strike. Megan had spent years building her reputation, not just in business, but in social circles. She thrived on power, on influence, on the perception of being the woman who always won. So when the moment came, it had to be public. It had to be undeniable. I arranged for a company-wide executive meeting. Megan, confident as ever, walked into that room expecting to finalize my removal. Instead, she found herself facing irrefutable evidence of her betrayal, projected onto a screen in front of the most powerful people in our industry. Emails, financial discrepancies, footage of her cozying up to Ryan in places she thought were private. Silence filled the room as she realized exactly what was happening. And that's when I made my final statement. Calm, composed, every word measured. I laid out the evidence, not just of her personal betrayal, but of her gross misconduct within the company. I made it clear that a vote would be held, not to remove me, but to remove her. I didn't look at her as I spoke. I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of her panic, the way the realization crept into her bones. For the first time, she understood. This wasn't just a counterattack. This was checkmate. The beauty of a perfect trap is that the prey never sees it coming. Megan was always meticulous, always controlled, always 3 steps ahead, until now. Because she had spent so much time carefully weaving her web of deception that she never once considered the possibility that she was the one being caught. The stage was set, the players in position, and all that remained was the final act. It had to be public. It had to be undeniable. Megan thrived on her image. Powerful, intelligent, untouchable. That was her currency, the foundation of her influence. So when I took it from her, I made sure to burn it to the ground in front of an audience that mattered. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. An emergency session, one she believed had been arranged to finalize my removal from the company. I watched as she entered the conference room, poised and confident, greeting investors and executives with that polished smile, completely unaware that every handshake, every nod of acknowledgement, was already slipping from her grasp. Ryan was there too, though he looked less assured than she did. Good. That meant the seeds of doubt I had planted were taking root. He had been avoiding her calls for the past few days, second-guessing every promise she had made to him. And soon, he would realize just how alone he truly was. I waited until the room was full before I stepped in. Megan's expression flickered for only a second when she saw me. Surprise. A hint of irritation. But she recovered quickly, smoothing it over with her usual cold composure. "You're early," she said, tilting her head. "We were just about to start." I smiled. Yes, we were. The doors closed behind me, locking the room into silence. I took my time, letting the weight of the moment settle, allowing Megan just enough space to wonder, to feel that flicker of uncertainty. Then I pressed a button on the remote in my hand, and the screen at the front of the room flickered to life. Emails, financial statements, security footage, every lie, every carefully hidden move, laid bare for the most powerful people in the company to see. Megan's face remained neutral at first, her mind scrambling, calculating. But as the evidence piled up, as the realization dawned on her that there was no way out, her mask cracked. A ripple of whispers moved through the room. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hand tightening around his pen, glancing toward Megan as if waiting for her to save him. But there was no saving anyone now. I had spent weeks preparing this moment, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "Before we move forward with any voting today," I said smoothly, "I think it's important that we review a few recent developments." I gestured toward the screen as an email exchange between Megan and Ryan appeared, detailing their plan to manipulate board members into securing my removal. This is just one example of the conversations happening behind closed doors, I continued, watching as Megan stiffened in her chair, her eyes narrowing, her breathing controlled but just barely. Let's take a look at another. More documents. More transactions. Company funds misallocated under her direction, funneled into personal expenses. A dinner for two at an upscale restaurant, charged under business networking. Except I had been out of town that night. A luxury suite booked under her name, but the guest listed was not her husband. A damning thread of evidence. Each new piece and nail in the coffin she had built for herself. The room was silent. The kind of silence that was dangerous. The kind that meant reputations were being rewritten in real time. Megan was losing control, and she knew it. I saw it in the way her hands curled into fists in her lap, in the slight tremor of her jaw as she fought to keep her composure. "This is absurd," she finally said, her voice sharp, clipped. "This is a blatant attempt to undermine me. These are private matters, not company concerns." I turned to her, tilting my head. "Oh, but they are. You see, Megan, when a CEO conspires to oust the company's founder, manipulates financial records, and engages in, let's call it ethically questionable behavior, those become corporate concerns." I could feel the weight of the room shifting. Executives whispering to one another, board members exchanging glances. This wasn't just a betrayal of me. This was a betrayal of the company, of their investments, of everything she had promised them. Ryan finally spoke, his voice cracking just enough to expose his nerves. I wasn't aware of all of this," he stammered, shaking his head. "I was under the impression that we were making strategic decisions." I almost laughed. He was already jumping ship, trying to distance himself, throwing Megan under the bus before she could do the same to him. Typical. Megan turned on him instantly. "Are you serious?" she hissed, her facade crumbling, her carefully curated image shattering in real time. "You were right there with me. You knew exactly what we were doing." Ryan shook his head again, looking toward the board. "I had no knowledge of the financial discrepancies. If I had, I would have." His voice trailed off. He knew he was done. I watched as Megan's world collapsed around her, as the realization set in that there was no spinning this, no clever manipulation that could undo what had just been revealed. Her reputation, her position, her carefully constructed empire, it was all gone. I let the silence stretch before I delivered the final blow. Effective immediately, Megan's position in this company is under review. A formal investigation will follow. In the meantime, I move that we vote on her removal as CEO. The vote was swift. Unanimous. Megan barely moved as it happened. She just sat there, staring blankly at the screen, her hands gripping the arms of her chair, as if she could physically hold on to what was already gone. The meeting ended. Executives filed out, murmuring amongst themselves, already shifting their alliances. Ryan practically bolted from the room, avoiding eye contact, leaving Megan alone in the wreckage. I lingered. She exhaled sharply, her voice low, unsteady. "You planned this." I met her gaze. Cold. Unforgiving. Of course I did. For the first time since this all started, Megan looked afraid. Not of me, but of what came next. Of a life without power. Without control, without everything she had fought to take from me. And the best part? I wasn't finished yet. Megan's fall wasn't instant. It wasn't one catastrophic event that wiped her from existence in a single moment. No, it was slow, painfully slow, a descent that dragged on for weeks as the reality of her new life settled around her like chains she could never break. At first, she tried to fight it. She thought she could contain the damage, that she could find a way to salvage what was left. She called investors, colleagues, anyone who still had influence, but no one answered. The board had already moved on, replacing her without hesitation, cutting her out of the company as if she had never existed. The people who once smiled in her presence now avoided eye contact. The social elite who used to invite her to exclusive events suddenly forgot to send her an invitation. It was over, and deep down, she knew it. The media tore her apart. The news of her corporate betrayal, her affair with Ryan, the financial discrepancies, it was all public knowledge now. Articles detailing her downfall spread like wildfire, analysts dissecting every mistake she made, turning her from a respected CEO into a cautionary tale of greed and arrogance. Investors distanced themselves, former colleagues denied ever having supported her, and even those who might have pitted her chose not to be associated with failure. She tried to push back, to issue statements, to spin the story in her favor. But when the world smells blood, it doesn't listen to explanations. It only watches as the predator turns into prey. Ryan didn't stay. He disappeared the moment the walls started closing in, abandoning her the same way she had abandoned me. He never loved her. He had only ever been an opportunist, riding the wave of her ambition, believing she could take him higher. But once she fell, once he realized she was no longer of any use, he was gone. No phone calls, no messages, not even a final conversation. Just silence. That was the thing about men like Ryan. They never stayed when there was nothing left to gain. Megan moved out of the penthouse the same week. She had no choice. It wasn't hers anymore. The place she had once stood in, looking down at the city with the confidence of a queen, was no longer her throne. Everything was liquidated. Her assets, her investments, anything she thought was hers was stripped away piece by piece. Without EtherTech, without her connections, she was just another disgraced executive with nowhere to go. She found a small apartment on the other side of the city, a far cry from the luxury she had surrounded herself with for years. A place where no one knew her name, where she was just another person trying to disappear from a world that had already forgotten about her. And me? I thrived. EtherTech went public as planned, but now under my sole leadership. The stock skyrocketed, investors doubled down, seeing me as the true mastermind behind the company's success. My name was everywhere, headlines praising the way I had handled the situation, how I had cleaned up the mess Megan had left behind and turned it into gold. While she faded into obscurity, I became more powerful than ever. Every meeting, every event, every strategic move I made reminded the world that I wasn't just standing, I was winning. And, of course, I didn't do it alone. There was one person Megan always underestimated, someone she treated as insignificant, a legal consultant we had worked with for years, a woman who had quietly stood by my side, watching everything unfold. Megan used to dismiss her, barely acknowledging her presence in meetings, acting as if she was beneath her. But while Megan was busy plotting my downfall, this woman had been helping me prepare for war. And now, she was the one standing beside me at events, the one investors and executives respected and listened to. Megan might have once been my partner in business, but she had never truly understood the power of loyalty. I didn't reach out to her. I didn't need to. I knew exactly where she was, what she was doing, how she was barely holding herself together. And that was enough. Because the best revenge wasn't about watching someone suffer, it was about knowing they had to wake up every single day realizing that they lost to you. Megan had once told me that power wasn't about control, it was about perception. That as long as people saw you as untouchable, you were. But she had learned the hard way that power is only real when you actually have something to back it up. And now? She had nothing. Megan never reached out. Not once. Not a desperate phone call, not a last attempt to explain herself, not even an apology whispered into the void. Maybe she knew it wouldn't matter. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to salvage. Or maybe, deep down, she had finally realized something I had known from the moment I saw the proof of her betrayal. Once you cross a certain line, there is no going back. But that didn't mean I never saw her again. It happened by chance. Months had passed. My life had only improved, and Megan had faded into irrelevance. One evening, I was at a private rooftop event, networking with top investors, enjoying the view of the city I now fully controlled. I stepped away from the crowd for a moment, letting the crisp night air clear my mind. And that's when I saw her. She wasn't at the event. She was down below, walking along the sidewalk, a shadow of the woman she used to be. The same woman who once stood beside me in penthouse boardrooms, who commanded rooms full of executives, who believed she was untouchable. She was now just another face in the crowd. There was no elegance in her posture, no presence in her movements. She wasn't looking at the city the way she used to, like she owned it. No, she was just existing. For a split second, she hesitated. Maybe she felt my gaze. Maybe she looked up out of instinct, searching for something or someone that was no longer there. But she never saw me. And then, just as quickly, she disappeared into the night, swallowed by the city she once ruled. I turned away, smiling to myself. That was the thing about betrayal. People always think it's the final move, the checkmate, the end of the game. But they forget one simple rule. The person you betray never forgets. And now, I leave you with one question. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Bye-bye.